Now I'm gonna be explaining an approach for event extraction that uses the idea of dual decomposition and of course minimal domain adaptation. I have a playlist for dual decomposition in NLP and parsing in general that first I introduce map estimation in graphical models and particularly Markov random fields, and then I talk about some techniques such as dual decomposition that is really important, which enhances and makes your LP relaxations, your linear programming very fast. And it is an alternative to max product algorithm and belief propagation. And they are all related. So I explained them in a different playlist. But now we are talking about event extraction. We are extracting events, their arguments, triggers, and those. So this article, Robust Biomedical Event Extraction with Dual Decomposition with Minimal Domain, their labels are a little bit different because it's a different problem, biomedical events, and for example, proteins and all of those data in a text, a biomedical text. So their data is a little bit different. There are other articles that are interesting as well, such as automatic event extraction with structured preference modeling. And so they are amazing scholars. And so what is robust event extraction? We applied to 4 tracks of the BioNLP 2011 shared task. Our model decomposes into 3 submodels that concern event triggers and outgoing arguments, outgoing arguments, and some ingoing arguments, and protein-protein binding. For efficient decoding, by decoding I mean inference, we use dual decomposition techniques that I've explained it in my playlist on dual decomposition. With minimal adaptation of our models, we come in second for 2 of the tasks. So if the event types, there are different arguments. For example, some of them for regulation, some of them for transcription. There are different types of events. There are different. So it's a distribution of events. For example, there are a lot of gene expression and post-regulation, and so these are event types, and primary argument. So particularly you're talking about theme and cause, so they are a little bit different than what you have seen in different data sets. So event annotation, for example, span from 15 to 18 is protein. So annotation T1 identifies the entity referred to by the string between the character offsets. And T2 identifies the string, when we say T2, it means translocation, to refer to a localization event. So this localization is just an event, and we want to extract them. Entities other than proteins or event type references are classified into a default class entity. So if we don't know what it is, we call it entities. It's very abstract. So the goal is here, finding these annotations just like any event extraction. You need to know what is the event and what are the attributes, what are the annotations. And our terminology is that we first present some notations and we label each candidate trigger I with an event type T, for example, and use binary variables to include this labeling. For example, E, I, and T. What is the is if it is 1, then your eyes, it has type T. Your eyes node has type T. And also for binary variable I, L, it means that for between I and L, we have an edge labeled R. R could be any label. So we consider node and label just like in map estimation, Markov random field, here with the same, almost the same terminology. So think about it, what you do in Markov random field. Markov random field has lots of applications in computer vision and NLP. For example, in computer vision, stereo vision, lots of applications that your graph is just a grid, very simple graph, and so each node has just has specific edges. So it's very simple, and we can think about as a simple graph. But in NLP, your graph, for example, in parsing, in dependency parsing, semantic parsing, constituency parsing, for example, in any kind of parsing, for example, dependency parsing, there is a relation. There is a relation between two words. For example, in dependency parsing, each head has some dependence, and we can model that. Of course, this lecture is about event extraction, but event extraction is very similar to dependency parsing. Because you can think about it, because the relation between two words could be anything. In dependency parsing context, we have different labels. In event extraction, we have different labels. So the map estimation is, for example, saying that. So I will explain map estimation on my playlist in dual decomposition, because I don't want to distract your attention. And so the score, let's define the score. What is a score of EAB? First of all, you have some constraints. Constraint, as I said, the ICE node has the ICE trigger I has event type T. If it has event type T, then it is 1. And similarly, if the binary variable, if between I and J has label R, it means it is 1. So these are constraints. And the third one is about proteins. Some bindings are proteins. If there is a binding between proteins, P and Q. So now we can understand what is the score of that structure. Because all of these relations that we use between words, we call this structure. And there are 3 types of constraint, as I said, E, A, and B. They are in green. E, A, and B, they are in green. We don't know these constraints. We don't know if there is a relation between them, and we want to identify them to obtain them. So our model scores all parts of the structure in isolation. It is a joint model due to 3 types of constraints. The first type acts on trigger labels and their outgoing edges. excuse me. The first type acts on trigger labels and their outgoing edges. It includes constraints such as an active label at trigger I. And you see, it's obvious. You just need to find the constraints E, A, and B. And to learn that W, because you know that each of these scores are just like linear models. It's a product of your weights and that features. So learning is different from inference. In learning, we learn W at training time, but once we know that, fix it, then these are fixed potentials. We have learned that. We assume that we've got your weights. And then at the inference, we use map inference, map maximum posteriori. But in the context of these graphical models, people use it. We use the term map because we are talking about map assignment. So they are related, but in machine learning community and graphical models and different communities, we have different names. But what I say is map, let's say map assignment, because we are assigning some labels, discrete labels to each node or edges or anything. So map inference at the test time and learn W at training time. And of course, after you learn it, you inference, and of course, you can do it to obtain to find the best weight. But learning in this paper, to learn W, we choose the passive-aggressive online learning. As loss function, we apply a weighted sum of false positives and false negative and edges. Because there are some edges that are correctly identified, some of them are wrong. So we create the loss function. And so now that we have the loss function, we can obtain the weights of the model. So we are not talking about inference. So features, we use a collection of tokens, for example, word form, lemma, par with speech tag. And for inference, that is important. For inference, I use this dual decomposition that I will explain on my playlist for dual decomposition in NLP and parsing. So if you watch that, you will understand what is that. So don't worry about this dual decomposition. Just think about that it is a method to obtain this maximum of this score. I mean, finding the constraint E, A, and B, because these are constraints. And what are these constraints? Because between two nodes, there is a relation. And for any I and J, we have a relation between them. So here, after doing the dual decomposition, so these are dual variables, lambda, mu. These are dual variables, and when it converges, you get the best. You repeat until you give all E, A, and B. At the end of the day, what you need is your constraints. You find your constraints. So, and from that, you extract that if between these two words there is a kind of relation. And this is from head to dependent, for example. So I will explain dual decomposition in my playlist on dual decomposition. I don't want to distract you, and also there are lots of papers. So the name of my playlist is Dual Decomposition for Parsing and NLP. There are lots of nice papers. For example, I've explained this one, and so you can use dual decomposition for NLP, for parsing, for many tasks in machine learning. So it's a very rich theoretical tools, but very few papers have used that for their tasks, and still there are many interesting ideas that we can add, because optimization is a rich thing. You can understand different methods like block coordinate descent and dual decomposition and convex optimization. So if you watch my playlist on optimization, I've explained those things that you need. For example, what is duality? What are KKT conditions? What are Lagrangian multipliers? And what is the gap? All of those things are very important.